The Road Not Taken. New York City, 2010. It was one of those evenings when the city pulsed with restless energy. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting neon signs and the headlights of passing taxis. Pedestrians moved in hurried strides, wrapped in their own little worlds. Somewhere in the middle of all this chaos stood Jake Walker, a man who had never left New York but had always felt like he belonged somewhere else. Jake wasn't an adventurer, nor was he a dreamer, at least, not in the way poets or artists were. He was a mechanic, one of the best in Brooklyn. The smell of gasoline and engine grease was as familiar to him as the air he breathed. His hands, rough and stained with oil, told the story of a man who built things, who fixed things. His life was predictable: wake up, work in the garage, go home, repeat. Until one evening, everything changed. The stranger and the Mustang. Jake was closing up the garage when he saw her. She was standing just outside, leaning against the doorframe, as if she had all the time in the world. The first thing he noticed was her jacket, a worn leather one that looked like it had been through 100 road trips. The second thing was her eyes, intense, curious, unafraid. "Are you the guy who fixes cars around here?" she asked. "Depends," Jake said, crossing his arms. "You got a car that needs fixing?" A smirk played at the corner of her lips. "68 Mustang. Stalled out on me a few blocks from here." Jake whistled. "Classic, let's take a look." They walked down the street together, her footsteps light, his heavy. When they reached the car, Jake popped the hood, inspecting the engine while she leaned against the door, watching him. "You got a name?" he asked. "Emily," she said. "You, Jake." "You always this talkative." Jake shot her a look, but there was amusement in his eyes. "Only with people who bring me interesting cars." Emily laughed, and for some reason, Jake felt something shift inside him, like a locked door cracking open. A world beyond the garage. Jake fixed her car, and Emily insisted on buying him dinner as a thank you. What was supposed to be a quick burger turned into a 3-hour conversation in a little diner off Fifth Avenue. She was a photographer, born in Los Angeles, but she had spent the past few years traveling the world: Morocco, Japan, Italy, Australia. Her photos had been featured in magazines he had never heard of. She lived out of a suitcase, chasing light and stories. "And you?" she asked, swirling her coffee with a spoon. "Me?" Jake hesitated. "I fix things, that's about it." "Come on," she said. "Everyone has a story." Jake thought about his life, about the garage, about the nights spent alone, about the feeling that there was something more out there, just beyond his reach. "I wanted to open my own shop," he admitted finally. "Still do, but, you know, life happens." Emily studied him for a moment. "Life doesn't just happen, Jake. You let it happen." Her words lingered in his mind long after she was gone. A series of almosts. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a fixture in Jake's life. She would drop by the garage unannounced, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to talk. They explored the city together: rooftops at midnight, quiet bookstores, hole-in-the-wall jazz bars. Jake found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else. She made him see the world differently, made him question things he had always accepted as unchangeable. Then, one evening, as they sat on the Brooklyn Bridge watching the city lights flicker, she dropped the bombshell. "I'm leaving next week," she said softly. Jake's stomach tightened. "Where to?" "Europe. For a few months, maybe longer." He stared at the water below. He should have seen this coming. Emily was never meant to stay in one place. "You should come," she said suddenly. Jake looked at her, surprised. "What?" "Come with me," she repeated. "Just for a little while, see the world. Take a break from all of this." His first instinct was to say no. His whole life was here: the garage, his routine, everything he had ever known. But for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that was enough. The choice. The night before Emily's flight, Jake packed a bag. He bought a ticket. He was ready. But then, at the last moment, he hesitated. The garage had been his father's before it was his. It was more than just a job, it was a legacy. Could he really walk away from it? He spent the night sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the ticket. When the sun rose, he knew what he had to do. He stayed. Emily left. Years later, Jake never regretted his choice, not really. He opened his own garage, just like he had always dreamed. He got married, had kids. Life was good. But sometimes, late at night, when the streets were quiet, he thought about a girl with a leather jacket and a camera, and a road that he had never taken. And then, one day, she came back. It was a regular afternoon at the shop when he heard the unmistakable purr of an engine he hadn't heard in years. A red '68 Mustang pulled up. Jake wiped his hands on a rag, his heart pounding. Emily stepped out, looking just as he remembered. "You still fixing cars?" she asked, smirking. "You still breaking them?" he shot back. They stood there for a moment, 1,000 unspoken words between them. "Want to grab a burger?" she asked finally. Jake hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah," he said, "I think I do." Some roads lead back. Life was funny like that. Sometimes you take one path and spend years wondering about the other. And sometimes, just sometimes if you're lucky, life gives you a second chance.